Luman Coad is a puppeteer who spent several years as the director of the Storybook Theater at Children's Fairyland in Oakland, California. He used the skills learned there to found his own puppet company, Coad Canada Puppets, that produced over 30 different puppet shows and traveled around the world performing them. He's worked in television and film and is the founder of Charlemagne Press, a publisher that specializes in books about puppetry. I talked to Luman Coad about all of this and more on this episode of Under the Puppet.
You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show.
Welcome to the show that is preserving puppetry through the personal stories of professional puppeteers. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Luman Coad, welcome to Under the Puppet.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. I tell you, you sent me I knew you had done a lot, but then you sent me your resume and it was 5 pages, and it's just the incredible amount of work you've done. And I'm excited to talk about, I don't know if we can get to all of it in this time, but we're certainly going to talk about a lot of it. I do want to start at the very beginning. Do you remember the first time you saw puppets, your first exposure to puppetry?
Yes, I was in grade 5. And the Laselli marionettes came to the small town in southern Idaho where I grew up. They performed Pinocchio, and they were their husband-wife team, Leslie and Eleanor Heath. I didn't speak to them afterwards, but when my family moved to California, I met them at the San Francisco Puppetry Guild at one of the meetings. And we became friends. I saw them probably in the 80s. They had retired to Modesto. And they said, I was passing through on my way to San Diego. They said they were going to pull out some of the puppets and perform for their neighbors the coming weekend. No, I couldn't stay. I had to carry on. I've regretted that. But I blame them for the disease that I've had the rest of my life.
And what was it about their performance of Pinocchio that really captivated you?
It was the small figures. I remember the show was a lot of dialogue. The puppets tended to stand and talk. And of course, my point of reference was the Walt Disney film. But when the scene changed to the whale, I was really quite blown away by it. And then afterwards, they took off the masking and demonstrated how the puppets worked, and that was it. I was hooked.
And were these marionettes or hand puppets? Yeah,
marionettes. No, they were marionettes. They were an interesting couple. They married in college, and sort of, I don't know how they got into puppetry themselves, but they influenced at least one other puppeteer, Jim Menke, who had lived in Buffalo, New York. So they're responsible for at least 2 of us.
Well, it's really great because they actually know them and met them, because for myself, for one of my birthday parties, my parents got a, children's entertainer to come to the party, and she had a hand puppet, like a Muppet style puppet. Mm-hmm. And, she had a couple different puppets, and I have pictures of her, and I've been trying to find out who she was because, that's one of the first times I saw puppets. But it's great that you got to, who they were, and you got to meet them.
Send me the picture.
All right, I will. I'll let you know.
I'll take a look.
Well, from that moment, did you start trying to learn about puppets, or, did that kind of come later?
It came a little later because this was a small town, 3,000 people. One day in the public library, I discovered the Edith Flack Ackley book on making cloth puppets. The folder at the back, which held the patterns, was empty. It said, ask the librarian for the patterns. So I raced back to the library and was told that the patterns had disappeared long ago. A while later, probably several months later, I was babysitting for my neighbor. And one of my bad habits is to study their libraries. There was a brand new copy of the book with patterns. So that's how I got started making Edith Black Ackley puppets. That's the type I used all of the time until my family moved to California when I was in grade 12 at the San Francisco Guild, the Puppetry Guild. Louis Molman gave me his patterns for the felt heads, the soft heads that he was making, using. And I started using my versions of the Ackley marionette bodies with the felt heads. And that's what I used for the 4 years I was at Children's Fairyland.
And at this point, were you like creating your own shows and putting your own shows together and performing?
Yes. Yeah. As an amateur, then my family were in San Jose, had moved to San Jose. So when I started at San Jose State College, a children's park opened there called Happy Hollow. And they were looking for a puppeteer and an assistant. I was hired as an assistant. I was there for 2 years, built 2 shows of my own during that time. And then Children's Fairyland had needed a puppeteer to take over from Tony Urbano. Like an idiot, I applied and was hired. And I would never wish it on anybody to have to follow in Tony Urbano's footsteps.
Yeah, Tony is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
You graduated from San Francisco State with a major in children's theater. So
I didn't quite graduate.
Okay. But you studied, your major was children's theater.
Correct.
And so was it kind of laid out like, hey, this is what I'm going to be a puppeteer. I'm going to perform and create things for kids. Was that your goal?
When not long after I started working at Happy Hollow, and my plan was to go into broadcasting. And I ran into the head of the children's theater department at San Jose State, and he said, "You must change your major. You've got to go into children's theater." And, okay. And thank God, it opened all of the doors, learning theater skills, all of the skills, and learning to approach puppetry as theater, not just puppet shows.
You also had a minor in humanities as well. How do you think humanities has helped your puppetry career over the years?
Wow. Okay, the humanities program at San Jose State was an honors program. It was based on the entrance exams. The top 10% of the entering students were invited to take this 2-year program. I received an invitation. It was work. We read the equivalent of a paperback a night. We had to write 9 essays a semester. We had 3 discussions a week, 3-hour-long discussion sessions, and 2 lectures. So that was 5 hours a week. The final exam each semester was 4.5 hours. So it was really, really intense. We started with the Greeks, studied the culture, the history, the arts, politics, and worked our way up to the modern age. The instructor said, "You're not going to remember all of this. We are providing you with a skeleton, and you will spend the rest of your life fleshing it out." And boy, were they right.
Was there anything like inspiring in the humanities or the study of it that maybe influenced your puppet shows or your, the topics and things that you covered in your shows?
I've drawn on many of the things that we we covered in the course or that I've learned afterwards. It's just been an enrichment, can draw on that to add certain qualities or certain elements to a production, to the script or to the characters, costumes, whatever.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I like to ask those kind of questions because for any young up and coming puppeteers in college, that it's like, oh, well, your other studies can influence your puppetry as well.
Absolutely. Having tunnel vision in college is, I would discourage everybody from just, this is what I'm going to do. Soak it all in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I went to college to do makeup, to do special effects makeup, which is kind of related to performing.
Yeah.
And then I didn't wind up studying that at all. I got into the performing aspect of it. So if I would have had that tunnel vision like you talk about, I would have been, working on Star Wars or whatever, but probably had a lot more work. The other question I love to ask, just as we're talking about kind of your early years, were your parents or family creative at all? Did they have any influence on what you were doing?
My parents were photographers, professional photographers. I'm very camera shy because of that. I think they were just bemused when I became interested in puppetry. Son playing around with dolls, and yet they were proud. They were supportive.
Yeah.
I was working with marionettes, the Flack Ackley marionettes, and my father built the stage for me that I used until we moved to California.
Yeah, you can't get much more supportive than that. Your dad helping you build the stage. Yeah. Well, I want to just touch briefly back on Happy Hollow Park in San Jose, California. How many shows were you doing a day for that, if you remember?
Weekdays, the park, for most of the year, the park was open Wednesday through Sunday. It opened at noon Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It opened at 10 a.m. on weekdays or during the summertime when school was out. So there were 2 performances on the shorter days, 3 performances, 11, 2, and 4 on the fuller days. I really wasn't allowed to help very much on building the new productions, which is part of the reason why I left. Because I was a puppeteer, but they had me out patrolling the grounds.
And you were the assistant puppeteer there. Who did you work with? Do you remember?
Ron Skolman
Mm-hmm.
was the puppeteer, or the head puppeteer. He was not really a puppeteer. He had made a set of marionettes for Alfred Warder of the Tower, but had never performed it. And he had built a stage based on the Rufus Rose stage that's in Marjorie Batchelder's book, Puppet Theater Handbook. It's a double bridge stage, very clumsy, time consuming to set up and tear down. One story about it is that when the park was closed during the 2 months in the winter, we would perform in the elementary schools. So Ron would arrive early in the morning, start setting up the stage. I was in college until noon. I raced to the school, help get the puppets ready, and we go into the performance. Well, I was given the wrong address one day. It took a while. I was late. I finally arrived. The audience was already in. Ron was trying to keep the kids interested by demonstrating marionettes. I raced up on stage, up onto the bridge, grabbed the first puppet. We started the show, and my nose began to bleed. And I remember Ron saying, the show was recorded, so we were playing to a playback. And Ron said, "Don't bleed on the puppets."
Yeah, that would change the story if suddenly blood is dripping down on the on the marionettes. So, how did I mean, I know you said that one of the reasons you took Children's Fairyland is because you wanted to do more puppets, but how did that opportunity come about? How did you get the chance to move to Children's Fairyland?
Tony had been an absentee puppeteer for 2 years. He built the shows and had somebody else do the performances. And after 2 years, the park wanted a resident puppeteer. At that time, nobody in the Bay Area was interested. And so that's how I got the job.
Last man standing. You're there.
Yeah.
You got the job. Yeah.
Yes.
We've talked about Children's Fairyland before on the show. I mean, we interviewed Randall Metz and we've interviewed other people who've worked there. Before we get into your time there, I would love to know from you, why do you think Children's Fairyland and the Storybook Theater are such an important, such an important place?
Longevity, because the theater, well, the park opened, about 1952, and Frank Hayward was the first puppeteer. He died very shortly after the park opened, and his wife continued the shows, but she hired other people to help or build the shows and so on. And Tony Urbano was one of the people. When she left, he became a puppeteer, but then he became involved in Poupée de Paris, building the puppets for Poupée de Paris, and returned to Southern California, but was sending shows up for 2 years. I think because it's there, because it has been so productive, doing 6 shows a year, or well, my contract called for 5, but I did 6 shows a year there, performing 3 shows a day. Every day the park was open. I look back on it as an experience similar to comedians in the 40s, 50s, 60s, like Bob Hope, George Burns, Gracie Allen, who had their training in vaudeville, doing daily shows and learning how to read and work with audiences. The one problem I found at Children's Fairyland was that the performer is inside the building, inside the theater. The audience is sitting outside. So you have to record the shows. Also, because the assistant was usually one of the college students who worked in the park, would come in sometimes 3 minutes before curtain, had never used puppets, and I'd have to train them in 3 minutes how to get a puppet on and off stage or whatever. So the shows were recorded. I missed the contact with the audience, of being able to work with the audience in timing, in their speech, in the speeches. It's a give and take. A performance is give and take between the performer and the audience. And that, when it's recorded, you lose a lot of that. So after 4 years, I felt, yes, I can stay here. It's a secure income, but there's more I want to do. And also because I had been to the 3rd International Puppet Festival in Bucharest, Romania, and saw all of the Eastern European theaters performing. Whoa, yeah, that's the direction I want to go into, theater, not puppet shows.
Would you recommend for younger puppeteers, because there's sort of these little theaters around, not as many as maybe we would love, but there's sort of these little theaters around the country, Arizona and in Brookline, Massachusetts. There's these puppet theaters. Do you recommend that as a good place to go for beginning puppeteers to sort of learn their craft?
I would highly recommend it. There's so much to learn. As we all know, puppetry involves all of the theater skills. Plus, I would also recommend young puppeteers learn some business skills. bookkeeping, for example. Working with experienced puppeteers is invaluable.
Well, this is a perfect segue because after you worked at Children's Fairyland, you created your own puppet company, the Coad Canada Puppets. Can you talk about the decision to start doing your own shows and creating, I mean, you were already creating shows for Children's Fairyland, but for yourself?
The contract to Children's Fairyland, the puppeteer is an independent contractor. So they own the shows.
Okay, yeah.
Those are their shows, unlike Children's Fairyland, where you build a show and it belonged to the park. What happened was the festival in Bucharest, I heard about it at a regional puppet festival. I mentioned it to the publicist at Children's Fairyland, who talked at that time, the theater was sponsored by the Milk Drivers Union. So he talked to them and they said, we'll send you if you perform. Gulp. I wrote to the festival and offered a performance and they accepted. So I went. Now, the only Canadian there was Arlen. We had met at the stage door at Children's Fairyland 2 years before. She and her husband and their 3 small children had come down to visit on holiday to California, had been told to come over to Children's Fairyland. And so one Sunday morning, there was a knocking at the door and this lady from Canada. Oh yeah, that big empty space north of the US. So she was at the Bucharest Festival and we spent time together. We were talking about working together, wanting to do something on a smaller scale, but something as powerful as the large shows that we were seeing. She said, well, there are no puppeteers of note in Western Canada. Why don't you come up here? And at that time, the Vietnam War was building. I was going to be drafted, so I left. And her husband, Arlen's husband, died about 2 weeks before I came to Canada. I moved in with the family and we were together for 33 years.
And that was the beginning of your own sort of puppet company.
That was it. Now, the very first production commission that we received or we got was for Master Peter's puppet show with the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra. And of course, I was used to doing everything myself. So I was going to design the puppets. And she said, I think I can do it. All right, we'll have a contest. Each of us will do 4 designs and we'll decide whose are better. Before I finished my first one, she had done all 4. I just looked at them and ripped up mine. She's the designer. She was just brilliant.
Yeah. Well, that's great finding someone who you really connect with, even, that quickly on shows is amazing. And to realize that connection early on and not be, you talked about tunnel vision early on. You could have been very much like, no, my designs are going to do it. But to be able to realize like, no, this is a much better designer,
It just took one look at her designs and
yeah, but I just mean sometimes, even I'm guilty of it. Sometimes we have this kind of ego thing where it's like, oh, my thing is going to be, but to be able to recognize that is a great trait to have.
Yeah, but then you see, I had all of the production skills in building scenery, building stages, of writing the shows, directing the shows, acting skills, all of those things she didn't have. And while she did perform, at the beginning, we were doing large productions where we had 4 to 6 puppeteers. And she always took the lead role, but she never really enjoyed performing. So when we started, quite accidentally, we started touring the elementary schools. which became our bread and butter work. And we decided to keep the cost down. I would do the performances. This left her free to work on other projects. And it was a great system because I enjoyed the performing, she didn't. And then we worked together on building the shows.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you talked from the beginning, you did 2 shows for Happy Hollow Park. You did 24 shows for Children's Fairyland, 34 for Coad Canada Puppets. Do you have some standout shows that are out of those that you've created? You were like, wow, this is, these few are my absolute favorites, or do you love them all?
I love the show that I'm performing at the time.
Yeah.
Okay, looking back now, my favorite shows, strangely, are the 8 shows that won citations, unanimous citations. One of them, The Box, A Show of Feelings, I have performed that probably over 5,000 times. And it's still a joy to perform because I'm still learning, or was still learning. I don't perform anymore because I have I've developed tremors in my hands. And so those shows, yeah, those are my favorites.
Yeah. And were these all just to be clear, were these all marionette shows? Were these all marionettes? No. Okay.
When we started working together, we were doing mostly hand and rod puppets.
Okay.
And then when the school shows started, it kind of morphed into hand puppets, using hand puppets, because then there could be 2 characters on stage. And I've become known pretty much as a hand puppeteer, although marionettes are my absolute love. We did one marionette show, Polly, which played in the schools. And this was an interesting character study of the toddler. The storyline is very, very thin. It's just a toddler and her world, her dual worlds, her imaginary world and the real world, and how she traveled back and forth between the 2 of them. And the amazing thing was, well, as we were building the show, as it was being built, Arlen was saying, "You're out of your mind. A marionette show? We haven't done marionettes in 12 years. And a show that doesn't have a storyline, a character study, you're crazy." So I performed it in the schools, and immediately, the very first performance, it just clicked with the audiences. But she didn't see it. Usually by the time we built the shows in the summertime, and by the time she had finished designing and we had finished building the show, she never wanted to see another effing puppet in her life. So she hadn't seen the show. There was a regional festival in Vancouver that February, and she was going to see the show. I was gulped because she was an honest critic.
That's what you want, but yes.
She didn't like it. I know. So I wasn't worried about the other puppeteers. I was concerned of what her reaction was going to be. Well, performing in the schools, I had gotten used to audience reactions covering some of the bridges in the action. That audience, this is the second time it happened to me. The first time was in Bucharest. The audience stopped breathing. They were just dead silent. They were so into the show. I knew I had them, but it was just, in the back of my mind, Arlen, what's Arlen doing? So afterwards, after people left and I was packing up, she said, "You changed the ending. You have to come down, pick up Polly and carry her off," because she just went to sleep on stage at the end. "Pick her up and carry her off like a toddler. And she was right.
Yeah.
It's the perfect ending.
Well, and she liked it, apparently, if that was her only
Yeah.
critique. Yeah. Well, I would love, you talked about learning about business. I would just love to ask you a few things. I mean, you know, for so many years, you ran your own company. What advice would you, like, if you had to give one person a piece of advice, they're starting their own puppet company to tour elementary schools and other places, what would you tell them about the business end of things?
Be businesslike. Be efficient, be professional, listen to your audiences, know what your audiences, you've got to know your audience anyway before you can encourage them into your world. And advertising, press releases, writing press releases, poster designs, bookkeeping, all of this, dealing with sponsors. It's all part of being a professional puppeteer.
Well, I was going to ask, when you were performing this way, where did most of your jobs come from? Were they word of mouth, or were you sending out flyers, or was it a combination of that? How were you getting your gigs?
The school shows, every fall we sent out a flyer, and it was amazing how quickly the schedule would fill up. We always sent them out at the end of the first week of school. And by 2 weeks later, our schedule was filled up for the year. We were doing 325 to 350 schools a year.
Wow. Yeah.
And well, performances, I should say, not schools. And we were doing 3 schools a day. One at 9 o'clock in the morning, the second one at 11 o'clock, another school, tear down, move over, then tear down, move over to a third school during the lunch hour. And if the school wanted two performances, that's where they were booked in the afternoon. So it was 4 performances, usually 4 performances a day. I don't think I could do it now.
Yeah. Well, I just love that. It's hard work doing that many shows in a day, and that many shows, you know, for in a school year, you think that's how many months, you know, 9 months or whatever, to do that many shows. But you must get so good, you know, like it's the practice.
It's the practice, the repetition,
Yeah.
the chance to try something a little different, to change a few words in a line to see how the audience reacts. Now, the one thing that always baffled me is I wrote some of the most hilarious lines ever in any production, and the audience didn't respond, but they would laugh at something else. Why?
Yeah.
And learning, okay, what is working, what isn't, and how to adjust it if an audience didn't react. Well, for example, at Children's Fairyland, one of the shows I did, an original show, was The Everlasting Lollipop, and a story about a kid who is given a lollipop, a magic lollipop. And he, I don't remember all the details in the show, but it starts growing and growing and growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, heavier and so on. And until it's completely unwieldy. He is then allowed to trade it for a real lollipop. So he asked the audience, this is the only time I ever used audience participation, asking the audience, what color lollipop should I ask for? They always responded, red. I only had a red lollipop. And it was because the whole show was set up that red was the good color, green, the magic lollipop, was not.
Yeah.
So when the question comes up, of course they're going to say red.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is you mentioned that some of your shows you would hire other puppeteers to help you perform. When you were hiring people to help you out, what sort of qualities were you looking for in the puppeteers that you were bringing on?
We didn't have too much choice. We hired 3 people for Master Peter's puppet show. One was an experienced puppeteer, very good. Another was president of the guild, the Vancouver Guild, who was really keen on puppetry. And the third one had no rhythm at all. And
That would
this
be me.
is an opera. And Elizabeth, the one who had no rhythm, was supposed to start at the beginning with the first character in a procession. And she could not get the rhythm. It was step, step, pause, pause, step, step. She just couldn't get it. So ended up having to tap her just ahead, tap for her movements. But no. An advice to somebody when looking for somebody for an assistant, somebody who can listen and feel music.
Yeah, especially if music is involved, if it's a musical piece.
Yes.
For sure. Well, on your resume, you list all the international tours you've done. And I mean, we can't read them all, but it's Brazil, Australia, Japan, Mexico, Sweden, Israel, East Germany, many, many places. I mean, not every single tour, but did you enjoy taking your shows to all these places around the world?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We usually took mime shows. No, I love doing the mime shows in the schools because mime requires the audience to invest themselves into the show. And also, they're without words. So we could take them anywhere. Although the interesting thing in the box, A Show of Feelings, the boy, at one point is in bed and there are night sounds. He looks under the bed. In Japan, there was no reaction to that. Of course not. They sleep on futons.
Right. So did you have a favorite place you traveled to perform at?
Oh, I think Japan.
Japan, yeah.
We were there 3 times. So in total, we spent over the years about 6 months in Japan because they were 2-month-long tours. It's so crowded, like here in up the coast from Vancouver. It's so crowded. I found it a little bit hard with people around, but the arts, the subtleties of the society. That was the great thing about doing all of this international touring was getting to experience different cultures because we were not tourists. We got to visit people in their homes, got to know people. It was a little difficult in the days before the internet, email. Our Christmas cards, half of them went overseas, about 40% went to the US and less than 10% to Canada.
Yeah.
It was kind of expensive.
Did you have any shows that you created that were sort of born out of your travels? Like either something happened or you experienced something and then it inspired a show that you created?
Yes. One in particular, What is a Bunyip? Was the title. A bunyip is a mythical creature in Australia that comes out of the bogs, out of ponds, and so on. And there was a book, The Bunyip of Berkeley's Creek, I believe it was, a children's book. And that kind of inspired the show What is a Bunyip? About a bunyip who appears and he doesn't know what he is. And he's told, oh, you're a horrible monster and you're this, you're that. But I don't feel that. And finally, at the end, he makes the decision, well, I'm me. I don't have to be what anybody else says I am.
Excellent. I love it. Do you still have all your puppets from all your shows
No,
or no?
no. I have about 150 puppets, I think.
Mhm.
Many of them, 2 years ago, I did a book, time for a commercial. I did a history of Coad Canada Puppets. I have the puppets for all of the shows that won Unima Awards. And what happened is at the end of a season, we would always make a decision, is this show a keeper or not? If not, then puppets were recycled, or Arlen would say, I don't want that around in somebody showing it off as one of my puppets. So we would weed out, have to weed out.
Well, I'm sure doing so many shows too, the wear and tear on the puppets, in addition, they're built for performances, and you do
Yeah.
over 300 performances with them, and so
Yeah.
at the end of the at the end of the run, they might not look as brand new as they were.
Well, yes and no. You
Yeah.
take care of them in the performances. But like the Bunyip character, he's out in the studio, but he was sort of a conical shape with a donut, a fuzzy midriff. And Arlinda used foam rubber for the comb. All year, the only movement was the neck and the head. He was a mouth puppet. All year, I fought with that puppet, trying to get some movement out of him. He had stubby arms controlled by rods. And that was about I kept complaining. So after the final performance, she said, oh, I'll show you. And she ripped out that conical foam, threw the puppet into a chair, and he just flopped into this most appealing position. Oh, that's what I wanted. And he's become a favorite puppet to demonstrate.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about that, because also on your resume, you talk about you have been a guest instructor for puppetry at many different universities all over the country. What sort of things do you go in? Are you teaching the basics of puppetry? Are you going in and helping with puppetry productions? When you're a guest instructor, what are you doing?
Well, it depends. Whatever the university wants, whether it is lectures or doing a performance or teaching, usually not building puppets, but theater skills. Like my favorite teaching was at Puppet Fest Midwest, because the workshops, each person would take one workshop for the entire festival. So I had 20 hours to work with the students. And one workshop, 1 year, I taught characterization, how to create characterization, and how do you start? How do you come up with a unique character? Another one was manipulation, movement. I'm not a good vocal person as far as puppet voices. So I always avoided teaching speech, but movement, story development, that sort of thing.
Excellent.
More the production end rather than construction.
Yeah. Because you also, I mean, you were a guest instructor, on your resume, you list all these universities, but then it's also 75 puppetry festivals across North America. So let me ask you this, because I've noticed it as a common theme, even from the very beginning. How would your career be different if there weren't things like guilds and puppetry guilds and festivals? Because to me, just listening to your story, it seems like those things were very important to your career.
They were very, very important at the beginning, especially because that's where we learn. The books can only teach or give you so much information. Then other puppeteers, the people who have been doing puppetry for a while can push you further. And then you need the audiences to learn from the audiences. So puppetry is a lifetime of learning. You never stop learning.
Yeah. Yeah, that is great. Well, I do have to ask you a little bit, I have to ask you the sort of search-friendly things and some of the television shows that you've worked on. And you've done a lot, but there's two I kind of wanted to ask you about, just because I know that there are people out there who are very interested in these topics. But the first one is 1997. You worked on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation.
Yeah,
Can you talk a little bit about what you did for that?
that was animatronics. Um, there were suit performers who were wearing these large heads. The puppeteers controlled the facial expressions, the mouth, the eyes, so on. I don't think the eyes had any movement, but we had two joysticks. It was a unique control, really great control. Two control sticks with buttons and so on, controlled the jaw, the lips, lower lip, the upper lip, the corners of the mouth. I think eye blinks. We were off at the side, reciting the lines or laying a scratch track of the voice and animating the faces. The one thing we had to always remember was to open the mouth when between shots, because that's where the poor suit performers were getting. Worse than that were the suit performers for Scary Movie 3, because those were thick foam ones that were writing. The poor guys had to lubricate themselves with a lubricant to get into the suits. Then it had to be closed and sealed up and touched up the seam and so on, so it wouldn't show. And these guys were in there for 12 hours. They couldn't see except when the mouth was open. They couldn't get air. They couldn't go to the washroom. I feel they really needed danger pay.
Yeah.
So the puppeteers, people, each of us who were controlling the facial expressions, spent most of our times with power fans blowing air onto these guys as if they were not on camera. They would go lie down in the shade, and then we'd be pumping air down to them.
Yeah. You're all the puppeteers are all in shorts. You're having drinks. You're waving to. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
You also did some work on for several years on Stargate SG1. Was that more animatronic type creatures?
Yeah. Most of the things that came up to Vancouver were animatronics, usually with the standard radio control boxes, working those. I remember one time, I've forgotten which, it was a single episode, but an effects house in Vancouver made this sort of puppet character, and they wanted to operate it. Well, because of union rules, I had to be there. They wanted to operate it. Okay, fine. Two of them were each one was working one toggle, and they were trying to coordinate. It was disaster. The director looked over at me, and I went, "That's all." He said, "You try it." And of course, working two thumbs, nothing to it.
Well, another thing that you have done since 1987 up till right now is you have been a very big in the world of puppetry books, and writing and publishing and editing. How did you start getting into that? Did start honing your talents in putting these great puppetry books together?
Well, when I started in puppetry in southern Idaho, there was no information. There was the Edith Flack Ackley book. That was it. And so in high school, I was editor of the school newspaper for 2 years and got experience in the publishing area, some experience. Arlen and I had created 6 manuals, mimeograph manuals on rod puppets and black theater, a couple of other things. And we wanted to do a more in-depth book on puppetry. So I sent proposals to some of the established publishing houses, and all of them said, we want beginner level books, not advanced. And that's when we decided to start a publishing arm, a secondary thing from the puppets, which it has now become my full-time job in retirement.
Yeah. Well, Charlemagne Press is the name of the publishing, your publishing wing. And there's just so many great books that you've released over and that you're currently working on. And I have several of them in my collection. So
But that's the fun part, you see. I can do what I want to do.
right.
I don't have an advisory panel saying, well, why don't you do this and why don't you do that? Arlen, it tickles me. She would do the illustrations, but when I did the marionette source book, it had, I've forgotten, 100 and some illustrations, line drawings in it. And I made up the list of what I needed, gave it to her. Well, she was busy with other projects, and I'll get around to it and get around to it. This went on for a couple of months, and okay, I'm going to shame her. I'll start doing the drawings, and she'll be so embarrassed that she'll take over. She didn't. She corrected 2 or 3 drawings, and that was it.
You tried to Tom Sawyer her, and she did not fall for it.
It didn't work. She was the Becky Thatcher.
I love it. Well, we'll have a link to Charlemagne Press in the show notes too, so people can check out all the wonderful things you've done. As we wrap up here, I always love to ask, sort of as the final question, Luman, what has been the highlight of your puppetry career so far?
All of it. I don't recall making a conscious decision to become a puppeteer. I think the puppets made the decision, dragged me into it. And I'm grateful because all of the travels, all of the people that we've met, all of the kids that influenced or worked with, it's really been a very rewarding experience. I'm rich. I don't have money, but I'm rich. Or as Richard Bradshaw, the Australian shadow puppeteer, once said, we were together somewhere, I think it was in Moscow, and he said, we are the impecunious jet set.
I love it. Well, Luman Coad, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Many thanks to Luman Coad for being on the show. For links to some of the things we discussed, check out the show notes for this episode number 98, over at underthepuppet.com. And if you'd like to hear even more of my talk with Luman Coad, download the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android and click on the gift icon in the listing for this episode. Thanks also to Randall Metz for his help with this episode. I would like to send a special thank you out to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who help make this show possible. Patreon patrons at the producer level and above who get a special shout out are Eve Cunning, Kathy Crawford, Tony Urbano, Brandy, David Akers, Paul, Scott Armstrong, Vicky Sebring, Ricky Chavez, and Karina. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media, and thank you for your support. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback about the show, send them via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Instagram or Facebook by searching for Under the Puppet. And don't forget to tell a friend about the show. This episode featured music by Dan Ring and was expertly edited by Steven Staver. Thank you so much for listening. Under the Puppet is copyright 2024 Saturday Morning Media Grant Pachoco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com underthepuppet.com.
Under the Puppet proudly presents The Adventures of Timmy the Tooth Reunion. In this almost 90-minute video, you will hear great stories from the cast and crew who brought this amazing puppet show to life. Plus, you'll see never-before-seen artwork and exclusive behind-the-scenes video. Under the Puppet's Timmy the Tooth Reunion is available right now at timmy.underthepuppet.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.